All right. So, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mute everybody now. Get my act together. All right. Hopefully you can still hear me. Today is Thursday, June 30th. Today is LPA's second quarterly training, and the topic is purchasing and receiving. And I want to emphasize, as you can see right here, and in the emails that we sent out, today's topic, purchasing, receiving, and I want to emphasize this is the basics, all right? We get a number of people throughout the year who will say to us, oh, we bought Counterpoint a year ago or 2 years ago. We knew just enough to get going and selling. We've never really gotten into purchasing. So today's training is especially for those folks who, it's out there and you just maybe have not done much. Or this might be for folks who do a little bit of purchasing, receiving, and you just want a refresher on the basics. The reason I'm accentuating the fact that this is the basics is that the follow-up, which will be our next quarterly training, will be purchase, receiving, advanced. And advanced will get into some topics that include things like there's things in Counterpoint called purchase advice. And that's where Counterpoint, there's some tools in Counterpoint that we can use that actually recommend to us, give us that tap on the shoulder in terms of what we need to be ordering and what quantities and things like that. And typically people are pretty interested in that, but I have to say we have to crawl before we can walk, we have to walk before we run, we have to run before we can fly. So even though some of you might be saying, wow, purchase advice, let's talk about that. Unless I show you the basics, it would just be very confusing if I tried to show you purchase advice. So if anyone's on this call and you're like, man, I know purchasing inside and out, but I'm here to learn about advice, check back in with us in September, all right? Or if you can't wait till September, call up our support, whatever, schedule a personal training with me in advance. Happy to do that. But today is the basics. All right, so you've been warned. If you know the basics, you've been warned. Here we go. I will say this, there's a chat ability to this, and you can type in questions. I don't always notice them as we're going, but at the end, I will definitely look through the chat and answer any questions that come up. If I don't answer your question immediately, it doesn't mean that I'm blowing you off. It's just I'm trying to stay a little focused. JC from our sales department is sitting in on this call. If there's a burning question, she might also try to get my attention. But with no further ado, here we go. All right, so just minimizing a few things here on my screen. So when we talk about oh, good. Whoever had that going on, you figured it out. Thank you. I thought I had everybody muted.
We can't hear you.
All right, I am so sorry. I guess I'm not a real champ at the GoToMeeting. I thought if I muted everybody, that would take care of the muting, but I guess I muted myself as well. Tell me, everybody, you can hear me again, is that correct?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hopefully, okay, my bad. I'll back up. So in Counterpoint, the high level, the top, the big picture to know about is we have this, the flow of purchasing. We start off with something called a purchase request. Purchase request is the very beginning. It's the first thing you do if you're going to create a purchase order. And it is, I describe it as, it's like creating a shopping list if you're going to the grocery store and you're going to jot down some ideas on a Post-it note. That's about as serious as the purchase request is. It's very light and happy. You can edit it. You can add items, delete items, change quantities, change costs. You can even delete the whole thing if you change your mind, and that's the starting point. And we'll be doing examples of these today. Okay, that's called, Counterpoint uses the phrase purchase request. That's the beginning document. Once you get serious about that, there's a step in Counterpoint we do called post. And when you post that purchase request, it then becomes something in Counterpoint called a purchase order. And a purchase order is a little more serious in Counterpoint. And by serious, I mean Counterpoint doesn't just let us go in and willy-nilly change items or delete or whatever. They give us a tool if we really, really need to make changes to a purchase order, and I'll show you that later today. But it's a little more locked down, and there's a good reason. It's not because Counterpoint is being jerks. It's because the idea is usually, if you got to the point where you're dealing with a purchase order, usually the idea is you are now communicating with a vendor, and somewhere there's a vendor filling this order, right? So if somebody in Vermont is, filling out a, $5,000 order of products and sending your way, we don't really want that purchase order changing a lot before it shows up on your dock. Otherwise, it's going to cause confusion, right? People are going to be like, we ordered this, we got that. It can be confusing. So by design, a purchase order is a little more locked down. Doesn't mean you can't change it. I'll show you the tools for that. But by design, Counterpoint is going to keep that kind of under wraps. All right, so we go off. We started with the purchase request. That was our shopping list. We got serious about it. We posted it. It became a PO. And now some time is typically going to go by, right? Some time is going to go by between when we've communicated all this information with the vendor and then they ship, the stuff shows up on our dock, whatever, and we're going to take it in. Receiving, that's the step that we'll go over today as well. And that's the step where we say to Counterpoint, okay, yeah, these are the things we ordered, but here's what we really got, all right? Now, maybe some of you are lucky. Maybe your vendors are very good to you, and whatever you order, that's exactly what you get. But we know in the real world, oftentimes there's changes, there's differences. You might have ordered 12 and they sent 10. You might have ordered some item that you really want and they're like out of stock. They may not send it at all. They may send you a different item as a replacement, who knows. But we'll go over receiving and show you how you can change and adapt that as to what actually was sent. So that's the high level. I really want to be sure everybody understands the big picture, because the next step we're going to go into Counterpoint and do the actual steps. So everybody, I'm going to go back to my camera here, maybe. Oh, I guess, I'm sorry, we don't have any cameras today. Is everybody cool with this flow so far? If not, unmute yourself and tell me if something's not clear. Okay, I will take that as we're okay. And we will keep rocking here. All right, so now we're going to go into Counterpoint. And I've got, today we'll be using a demo company that I have. But everything we're doing, of course, would apply to your company as well. So everything that we do that has to do with purchasing, we're going to find under this main menu. And I'm going to purchasing. And you can see here, here's three things we talked about today: purchase requests, purchase orders, receiving. Some of you might still be on a previous version of Counterpoint where your menu might look a little different. When I refer to these things like purchasing, you probably have these exact things, but the menu, there are buttons going across. So if your menu looks slightly different, it's okay. It's going to work the same. You just have to find the same buttons, okay? So here we go. So these are the three things we're going to really focus on today. We're going to start off with something called a purchase request. And we'll go through how to create that. When we get serious about that, it's going to become a purchase order. And then the last step we'll do today is we'll get into receivings. Okay. Now, I should mention before I get too far, Counterpoint does allow for the possibility that you might just choose to go directly to receiving. We have a number of liquor stores, and just the way the business works for them is they're not creating a purchase request in advance. They might have a vendor that comes on site, walks around the store for 15 minutes, comes back and says, this is what you need today, and they start bringing in the items and putting on the shelf. If that's your flow, You can go straight to receiving, and I'll show you an example of that before we're done today. But either works. It's just a matter of how you want to do business. Some people like the fact that you can start with a purchase request because they can get it all dialed in, they can place their order, whatever, and they have some control over it. Some people really like going straight to receiving. We call it receive without PO, just because it's what they're doing is very changing, and they're like, it'd be a waste of my time to create a purchase order, so I'm just going to turn right around and receive it. So those are the two ways to do this. We'll start with the full-blown way, and I will show you receive without PO as well. So here we go. So I go into my purchase request, and the starting point for a document and counterpoint is purchase request enter. I've got a couple of batches. You may not have batches, but I'm going to choose the manager batch. And here's the document we're going to start with. Now, I will say there's one part of this that I think is not very user intuitive. When you're starting a document in Counterpoint, the starting point or the starting button is typically this button called Auto Assign, and that's not very intuitive in my mind. You might get here, you might click on the magnifying glass, and there's nothing here. You're like, what am I supposed to do? You can see there's all these fields down here, and ship to, lines, everything's sitting there, but how do you get to that? And so what you need to know is the starting point for a document is this button called Auto Assign. And you'll notice just by clicking that one button, the rest of this opened up, and now I'm ready to continue. We'll do a number of examples today, and I'll just kind of do a quick one so you can see this. I'm not going to get too fancy on my first one. So on this first tab, it says vendor. You'll notice here, the only field that's required is in this highlighted green color. That's the only field that was required. Once I chose vendor, these other fields filled in, but they're not required. All right, so on the first tab, the only thing that was required was vendor. I can go to the ship to. I'll just point out the only thing that's required on this tab is location, and it defaulted to my main location. You could choose to fill in other things here, but nothing's required other than having the location, and that defaulted, so I'm good there. I can go to my order tab. The only thing that's required on the order tab is the date, and for most people, if you're starting a purchase request, that date is today. So really, this is filled out as well. There's a place down here for some comments if you like to put in comments or you want to specify who the buyer is. But the only thing that was really required was order date. Now, sometimes people notice these two fields, delivery date and cancel date. I would describe those as informational. You can put those in, and if somebody else looks up this PO later and is curious, when are we expecting this, they can see if you put in that expected delivery date, they can see that information, or they can see what you consider a cancel date. But they're really informational. If you put a cancel date and you don't get this by, let's say, August 1st, Counterpoint doesn't go off and do anything. You could run your reports and say, hey, show me everything that's past the cancel date. So you can use that date, but just know Counterpoint doesn't go off and do anything just because you put a cancel date. So to go back one step, when we began this, we hit Auto Assign. On the vendor tab, we chose the vendor and the rest was populated. I already showed you on ship to, there's only one field, and that's populated for us. Order, date's populated, unless you want to put some comments. Really, once you pick your vendor, you could honestly skip directly to lines. And lines is typically the part that people care about, right? Lines is where we're going to go start grabbing our items and putting in quantities and costs and all that stuff. So here I go. I'm going to go just look up some quick items. Typing. So this is my golf company, so I'm just going to grab some quick golf clubs here. You'll notice the way these forms work in Counterpoint. At the bottom of the form is where you put in your information. So in this case, I'll say 6. Maybe the cost changed a little bit on this. They used to be 155. Maybe these have gone up to 165. And I'm just using my tab, T-A-B. I like the tab key on these forms because I just hit tab a couple times. You'll notice that line that I was working on, that has popped up into the middle part of this form. And that's the goal. The goal is we're going to fill in this middle portion of the form with all of our items. Once I've gotten off of that item, I can still go back to if I wanted to. I can just click and highlight that line item. And then down below, those fields get populated, and I can make changes. Maybe 6 was a little heavy-handed. Maybe 2 would be more than enough. And again, I'm just using tab. I hit tab a couple times, and now that order quantity up here has been reflected. So very standard way. There's a lot of different forms in Counterpoint that all behave kind of the same way, where you're entering information at the bottom. As you click through it, then it's going to show up at the top. So that's that. I'm going to put just a few lines on here real quick. If you know an item number, sometimes people say to me, well, if I know the item number, can I just type it in? The answer is yes, you can. Of course, I pick one that doesn't exist. So you know, be a better example if I pick something that exists. There's one. So let's do 4. And I'm clicking this magnifying glass. Let's do. And you can see how this works. So I'm clicking item field. I'm looking up an item. I could use my keyword search, and I can put in whatever, right? So I'm choosing items, choosing quantities, choosing cost. Everybody, are you good so far? That's hopefully kind of straightforward. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's say we've been building this and everything is cool. Now I have a couple options once I've created this far. One thing I could do is I could just save this and I could come back to it later. So maybe you started this before lunch, you got interrupted, no big deal. I can hit save. I can leave this entirely, and it's just sitting there. It's only sitting there as a purchase request. So I could come back. I could, this time when I click my lookup, before there was nothing here, but now there's a purchase request that I already started. So I can pull that back up and I can pick up where I left off. I mentioned earlier that these are very, very flexible, right? And I'll prove it. I could look at this ADMTL5 and decide I don't want it. So up here under line, there's a choice here called delete line. If you're a kind of person that likes shortcuts, you can use the control key and delete. That's a nifty little shortcut, and you can delete lines. If you forget that, just come up to lines, look for delete lines, and you can delete. It'll ask me, are you sure? I'll say yes. So you can take lines out, add lines. I could look at this and say, no, this was supposed to be 4. Make changes. This was not supposed to be 180. This was supposed to be 190, and etc. So I can come in here, do all the changes I want. Now, once you get serious about this, and it gets to the point where you want to move on in life, there's the step in Counterpoint called post, and it's right here. And I'm going to go ahead and click this so you can see what happens. This is going to take, actually, I'm sorry, let me preview. I'm going to preview this. Sometimes people will create a purchase request and they want to print it out. So here under purchase request, there's something called purchase request forms. I'm going to just look this up real quick. I only have today. So here's our form. Make this a little bigger. So nothing too fancy with the purchase request form. You'll notice there's a purchase request number. There's an order date. I have who's the vendor, and we have where it's getting sent to. So everything's all cool. You can see you have items and quantities and costs, and if I go to the bottom, you get totals. So hopefully nothing too surprising on that. That's a quote-unquote purchase request. And this is still very malleable, right? You can do anything you want with this. So let's say we get serious about this, and we're ready to move on. And for a lot of people, you may never save the purchase request. Once you have your lines, you probably, a lot of my customers, you're gonna pick out your lines, you're ready to move on in life. And so you'd go straight to post. So we've got our lines, everything looks good, I like my totals, and I'm gonna go ahead and say post. So now, this is gonna start out life as a, to start out life as a purchase request. I'm gonna go over now and within purchasing, and I'm gonna go to purchase orders. And you'll see, I can go pull this open. I'll look up my order date. And this is now a purchase order, okay? Now, when I preview this form, if you remember that purchase request, you might say it looks identical. And honestly, it's very, very similar. About the only thing that's different is at the top it says purchase order instead of purchase request. It has similar information. It has a SKU number. It has dates. Everybody help me out and mute yourself if you can. And let's see. JC, I don't know if you have the ability to mute people. I'm going to take a quick look here, see if somebody I need to mute. So this is a purchase order. Looks very much like a purchase request, but it is now a little more serious within Counterpoint. And I'll prove that in a couple ways. Back with our purchase request, we could do just about anything we wanted. Now this is a PO. And you'll notice under the purchase order form button, there's not a lot of choices here. We could print a form, great. I could cancel a PO, great. There's something here called change. You might see that and say, well, great, that's, I want to change a PO, but I'll show you that this is actually fairly limited. So we're going to come in here. I'm going to look for what I just did today. So here's the one I created today. And okay, so I can change the vendor's address. I probably don't care about it, but I could. I can change fields here. There's a lot of stuff that seems like it's editable. And then I'll get to my lines, and then this is where you'll be sad. I'll just point out I can't change the quantity. I could change the cost. So sometimes you might get this whole thing created, and the vendor comes back, especially in this day and age, and yet again, the costs have gone up since you last started, right? So you can change costs, and sometimes that's all people need to know. I'll get that call and say, hey, I have this huge PO, my costs are not right, can I change my costs? The answer is yes. But you'll notice I can't add or delete items. If I go down here to this last line, if I try to add, I chose an item that already exists, that's cheating. I'll try to pick somebody else here. It's a no-go, right? So again, a PO is fairly locked down and it's intentional, okay? I'll show you, usually once we get to this point, someone will say, yeah, but what if I have to? I'll show you an example of how you would change it if you had to. So there's something in Counterpoint that's called reissue. And what reissue means is, yes, we've got this PO, but for whatever reason, I have to make substantial changes to it, okay? Now, Counterpoint will actually allow me to do that, but there's a step called reissue. And what reissue means is we're going to take something that was a PO and we're going to push it back in the process back to being a purchase request. So if you remember my beautiful document at the beginning, we started life with a purchase request, we posted that, it became a PO. Now suddenly we've got this PO, we really want to make substantial changes. Counterpoint will let us do that, but it's going to have us do a step called reissue, pushes it back in the process, back to being a purchase request. So instead of just talking about it, I will show you. So here's my PO. Here's some lines that we showed that I could change costs, but not much more. And I will say reissue. And reissue is going to push this back in the process. So it tells me PO blah, blah, blah has been reissued. Would you like to edit this purchase request? And the answer to this is typically yes, because the only reason I would do the reissue is because I want to make changes anyway. So I will say yes to that. And now we're right back. This is back to being a purchase request. And if I go to lines, life is good. We're back to the world where I can change anything I want because it is now a purchase request. So add lines, do whatever. Everything's great. Okay. Typically, once I've made my changes, I don't want this really to live as a purchase request forever. I'm going to post this, and I'll go back to being a PO. I'm going to view this PO form so you can see this. So again, we're back to a PO. You'll notice I do have a little heads up. It tells me there was an original PO. This is a reissue. The PO number, there's two different ways you can do this. In my example I did here, I have my Counterpoint set up that actually gave us a new PO number. Sometimes that can be confusing. So there is a setting in Counterpoint where we can reuse the original, but then they're going to tack on a -R for revision. So if I had my settings slightly different, this would show up as 110062-R1, meaning revision 1. If you reissue a revision, then it'll just keep incrementing that number. So you could have this PO -R2 or -R3. So that's what that's all about. And now we're going to go on with kind of some standard purchasing. So that's I would think the reissue, that's kind of an exception. But let's go back. We're going to do some more purchase requests just to get in the hang of this. So I'll try to do less talking and more just showing you here. So purchasing, I'm going to create one from scratch. Purchasing, request, enter. Pick my batch. And again, the starting point is something called auto sign. I'm going to pick some vendor. I don't know what I'm going to pick here. And away I go. So this is just showing you easy peasy. You know, when I talk through these, it takes forever and you think, oh my gosh, it took us, 20 minutes to create a purchase request. Once you guys are doing these on your own, I promise you it won't take you 20 minutes. It'll probably take you 5 minutes because you come in, auto sign, pick a vendor, go straight to your lines tab, start picking your items. Now, I've been showing you the easy example where the items already exist. I'm sure it's very common that when you're creating a purchase or when you're purchasing, you might have some brand new items, never been carried. That's fine. In Counterpoint, you can click on the magnifying glass. Maybe I'm looking for something that we've never carried, something that doesn't exist. Perfectly fine, there's no problem. What I can do here is there's the add button right from this lookup, and they call this add on the fly, which means this pops me right into my item form. Hopefully you guys, people on the call, know about creating items, existing items. But this is just your standard item form. No worries. You're right here, and you can start creating a brand new item. And I'm going to use my copy from. So I'm going to copy from this guy and create this brand new item. Call this Callaway XXX. Sorry, those pop-ups are probably turned off for you typically. So here I am, and just like that, I can continue on my merry way. Just using the lookup and the add, we created a brand new item, and we get to continue. The nice thing about this is we never had to delete the purchase request, right? That's kind of the whole point of that. Add another item here. And again, the point of this is we're just boom, 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 adding items. I'm going to save this. We're going to do one more example, and then we'll go on and talk about the next steps. So far as I've been doing this, when I hit my, let's see here, let's pick a new vendor. On the lines, I've just been using this lookup, and if you notice, my vendor this time around is Dunlop, and you may notice all kinds of different items are showing up, and I don't expect you to know this item file, but there's items that show up for all kinds of different vendors. So Counterpoint's trying to be flexible and allow you to pick any item out of your inventory. Sometimes for some folks, this might drive them crazy, right? They will say, hey, if I'm in the middle of a Dunlop purchase request, why on earth am I seeing Taylor or Callaway or whatever? Those are vendors. Dunlop's never going to carry a Callaway Big Bertha or whatever. Okay, fair enough. So Counterpoint gives us two options. The first one's the lookup that I've been showing you. This is the most flexible one, and I would say if I was talking to the Counterpoint folks, they'd say it's intentional that it's flexible. You might carry an item, let's say it's a generic soccer ball. You might get that from 3 different vendors, and who you buy from today is just based on who has the best price. So Counterpoint wants this to be flexible so you're not limited to one vendor. Okay, so it's good that we can purchase from different vendors all within one purchase request. However, maybe there's times where you don't want the noise. It's too confusing to see a bunch of items you don't care about. So here's this nifty button called Add Items. Save changes. And this is what this looks like. So this is a nifty little tool where we can come in and it brings us in. It gives us some filtering choices before I go to my Select Items tab. For the moment, all I care about is I'm going to filter for my primary vendor, and I'm going to go on to my Select Items. And although maybe this is not exciting to you guys, but I have a number of customers that this is a huge deal. I am creating a purchase request for Dunlop, and now because I went to this Add Items into the Select Items tab, these are only items that are assigned with Dunlop as their primary vendor. Okay. Some nice things about this form. I can come in and I can take advantage of just click and pick, boom, boom, boom. And if I say add lines and close, it's going to scoop those up. And now it kind of took care of that first step of just finding my items. And now I can go in here and start picking quantities. So, and if I need to change cost, so be it. That doesn't seem like a really great cost. So we'll make up some costs here real quick. And the point of this is we use the add items to quickly bring in whatever. And now I just go through and tidy that up, right? And I can make changes. Maybe I decide I don't really want this, and so I can take off lines. So that's the add items, and that's the answer for if you click on the lookup, and if you're the kind of person that drives you crazy that you're seeing items that you could never purchase from Dunlop, the answer to that question, no big deal. You hit add item. It's going to ask me, do you want to save my current changes? So I'll say yes. This is giving me a heads up that I've pulled in some costs that I made up some costs that are too low. That's fine. We'll come back and fix those. And now I get to filter. Now, if you have a vendor that has thousands and thousands of items, you might want to filter just down to a category before you continue. So if you wonder why do they tell me to set filter, why don't you just let me see all the items right away? They're trying to be nice and give you a chance to filter this list, especially if you have thousands and thousands of items. So I can go here, I'll just pick one more. Maybe I missed this the first time. Add lines and close. Now you can put in your quantities at this point, and you can update costs. I'm just kind of in the habit. I kind of like this form for just gathering up my items. I'm kind of used to that. And then once I got everybody in one place, I'm kind of used to going in here and fixing these up. Okay. I think this was complaining. I think I had a cost that was ridiculously low. Let me hit save again. So bag. So this is just a heads up that my costs have changed too much. So my last cost on this bag was 62. So maybe I'll fix this. So I don't keep getting that message. That's just a safety net for me, giving me a heads up that maybe I have a typo. All right, so that's in terms of creating a purchase request. Those are two forms of gathering that up. Now again, today is about basics. Today is about just walking you through how do you create a purchase request. Next time we do a fourth quarter training, it'll be on advanced purchasing. And one of the nifty things in Counterpoint is something called purchase advice. And I'll show you a tool on that day where using purchase advice, you use Counterpoint. Counterpoint actually creates the purchase request for you. So you go in, you pick a few choices, and you say, here's the vendor, here's my criteria, and Counterpoint goes off and creates this first step. So when you use purchase advice, the net result is Counterpoint creates the purchase request. This is why I've got to teach you about purchase request before we talk about purchase advice, because you wouldn't know what to do with this once Counterpoint creates it. And we'll talk about when that time comes after you've ran purchase advice. You get this purchase request. It's not carved in stone. You can then go into this purchase request and you can tweak it however you see fit. So when we talk about purchase advice, the emphasis is on advice. They're not going to lock you down to anything, but it is a tool in Counterpoint that can maybe save you a few steps. So that's my teaser for the future. But for today, we'll focus on just the mechanics of the purchase request and receiving, etc. So here we go. So we got this purchase request. Everything looks cool. I'm going to go ahead and post this. Yes, yes, yes. I don't need to do anything right now. And at this point, let's see, I guess I have another one of these saved. Let me post this one too. Okay, so whatever purchase requests we created today have been posted. If I go over to purchase orders, I can prove that we've got these guys. This is the form. I'm just going to filter for anything I created today. And here are my purchase requests. So here's one that started with 63, 64, 65. So we got 3. So 3 purchase requests that we created today. Now, Again, with a PO, not a lot to do with this, right? If you got to this point, chances are you don't do much with it. You could print the form, you could email it to your vendors, whatever. But now the idea is somewhere there's a vendor filling it. And now we're going to switch gears and we'll talk about receiving. Any questions really quick, just on the beginning of this, because we're kind of completing the section of the purchasing and getting to the point of a purchase order. Any questions before we move on to the receiving? All right, then I will keep rocking here. Okay, so again, we've gotten to the point, we've communicated with a vendor is filling this order, and now it's going to show up on our dock, and what do we do with that, okay? And at this point, those items, those quantities, they are not in Counterpoint. The point of doing a step called receiving, that's when the quantities actually make it into Counterpoint. Now, I mentioned earlier, I used the phrase a PO is slightly more serious in Counterpoint, and I'll prove it. I'm going to go look up an item. Here's an item that we've been working on. You could do this right from point of sale, but you could zoom an item, and you'll notice. Let's see if I have a good example. Do I have a good example? Maybe that's not a good example. Let's pick one I don't have. Here we go. So here's an item, and you'll notice this button that didn't exist for other items, but now it says Open POs. So if I click on that, you actually see, and again, someone could view this right from point of sale. They could be trying to ring somebody up, and you're like, oh, we don't have any of those. You go zoom that item, and you can see, an average employee could come in and look at this and say, oh, I can see it's on a PO. They could even click on this. This is purely a view. They can't edit anything, but they could actually come into this and go, oh, well, this was ordered on June 30th. If you choose to put in things like expected dates, whatever, they could actually come in and look at this. So if you're the buyer for your enterprise, this might save you a few phone calls. If your employees learn how to zoom an item, and they can actually check and see if something's on order. Okay. So how did I get there? This is all throughout Counterpoint. If you have an item, there's a Z for zoom. And if it's on an order, they'll know it, because instead of being grayed out, this is lit up. They can click on that. There's no date here, but if you drill into it, you can find out the order date. Okay. So that's why I'd say it's more serious. You'll notice there's nothing for purchase request. You can start a purchase request. Nobody else in Counterpoint even knows that's taking place. But once you make it a PO, then other people are aware of it or can see it. All right, so we're going to talk about receiving now. Here we go. Oh, and tell you what, let's look at an item, because we'll have a before and after. Make sure I got one. Okay, so one of our items is this ADM TL7, and I'll just point out we're expecting 4 of those. Right now, our quantity on hand for Maine is 23, and the fact that we created a PO, that didn't change that. But when we receive it, I expect for Maine, that's going to change. Our overall quantity on hand is 27. That's enterprise-wide. That'll go up as well. So here we go. So where we're going for receiving, we're going to purchasing, receiving, enter. And we'll come in like so. And again, the starting point, I have a different name for this button, to be quite honest. I wish this was titled Look Up PO, because that's really what this button will do. So I'm going to click auto assign, but really is look up. And here's the list of all my open POs. All right. And we'll start off. This is one of the first ones we did today. We'll go ahead and grab this. Now, Counterpoint pops up this box each time we come in. And these are the defaults for how the form is going to behave on the next step. And we'll come in and do this a couple times so you can see what these choices do for us. When in doubt, the first answer in each of these little groups is usually not a bad place to start. Set copied lines. We're going to start off, our lines are selected. Our quantity received defaults to what we ordered. And if I didn't get it, what's supposed to happen? They use this phrase back order, but maybe a better way to say that is what they said here in quotes. Leave on PO. So we'll start off with this. I'll show you what this does for us. But we'll say okay to this, and this, we looked up the PO. Now I go to my lines tab, and this should look a little familiar. This was the very first purchase order that we created today. And you can see here's our items, here's whatever our quantities were, and here's our cost. Now, of course, at the time of receiving, this is where we put in what really happened. So regardless of what cost you might have said, now the stuff actually shows up, and you know from the invoice what the vendor's actually charging you. This is your chance to put in those actual costs. So starting with this very first one, let's say, I ordered 4, quantity received 4. Now, you might say, how did that quantity 4 get there? It's because when I came into this form, there's that question about the defaults, and I said, default the quantity received to the quantity expected. You don't have to do it that way. I'm going to back up one step so you can see this, see the difference. I'm going to go right back into that very same receiver. Instead of quantity received defaults to expected, you could decide, you could go this route, say quantity received defaults to 0. If you go this route, then when I come into my form, my quantity expected hasn't changed, but you'll notice for quantity received, now it's on me to come in here and line by line put in what actually happened. I would say my customers are probably split 50-50. When I'm doing training, half the people say, absolutely, I want the quantity to default to the expected, because I don't want to have to go through and type in every single quantity, right? The other people say, absolutely not. I absolutely want my employees to go in and put in exactly what's on the invoice, and I know they did it because they had to, right? There's no default. Either way works, and the good news is you get a pick. You even get to pick whenever you come into the form. So maybe one vendor is really good to you, and whatever you order, you typically get. So for that vendor, you might do it this route. You still can change these, but at least it might save you a few keystrokes that whatever you ordered, the client receives defaulting to what you ordered. But you could certainly do the other route. So what you decide to do is entirely up to you, and you get to decide whenever you come into the form. Okay. There's that phrase quantity back order. Well, let's just do a really simple one. Let's just say everything's all cool. We ordered these. The only thing that didn't happen is maybe this last item, they didn't send us these. Okay. So one item out of a whole bunch they didn't send. So I'm going to say for that last item, quantity received 0. I got 0 of these today. Now here's this interesting column over here called quantity to back order. Again, I think a better name for that could have been leave on PO. Okay. When it says quantity back order, it almost sounds to me like as if something else is going to go off in Counterpoint and generate another document, and that is not the case. All this means is if I have a quantity there, it's just going to stay on the PO. Now prove it. So here's the proof. So the first 3 items, whatever we ordered, we got it. The costs are all fine. Everything's cool. But this one item, I asked for 2. They didn't send any. But I'm going to give them a break. I might still wait another week or 2 because I really want these. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to post what we've done so far. And now, because I posted, we'll go check that TL7 item in a few minutes. But I'll prove that the quantity on hand has gone up. Okay, we'll go back and prove that in a second. So let's say now a week has gone by, and they finally do ship what I wanted. When I click on my auto assign, you'll notice this PO, that one that ends in 63, it's still open. And it even tells me how many lines. This might have started off with 65 individual line items on there, and we got all of them except one. So it's still quote unquote open, meaning I can look it up. And it's a nice heads up from Counterpoint. There's only one line that I'm still waiting on. So I can go right back into this like we did before. I get my choices again each time I come in. And now when I go to lines, you'll say, aha, right? Anything I've fully received has been dealt with. It's not going to show up on here. It's dealt with. Nothing more we need to do with that. But what is showing up is this outlier that didn't show up. Now maybe a week has gone by and they finally did ship it. Great. Quantity received is 2. If I wanted to, I can go ahead and hit post, and I'm done with this. Another possibility is they didn't ship, and I don't know, maybe these were Christmas ornaments, and if I didn't get it by Thanksgiving, forget it. It's too late, right? Or I don't know. Just if I don't have these by December 15th, really too late. So you can come in and you can say, I ordered 2, I received 0, and I'm not going to wait any longer. So I can put 0 there. If I post this, Now when I go back and I do my PO lookup, you'll notice that the one that ended in 63 has fallen off, meaning it's closed. Everything that had to do with that PO has been dealt with. Yes, there was a line item, but we're not waiting on them anymore. We're done. That PO is done. All right. So that was an example of how that kind of looks. Now I promise you to go look at that item. So we'll go back and look here. And I believe it was, oops, man, my typing today is not the best. So that client hand is bumped up, and if you're wondering why, we can go zoom this item. We were at 23 before, we received 4, and you can see that client hand went up. So receiving, that's the moment where the quantities and the costs actually go into counterpoint. All right. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. I'm somewhat conscious of our time here. I'm going to do one more receiving so you can see it with maybe just slightly less talking to give you a sense of these don't take forever. So I can go to my purchasing, I go to receivings, I go receivings enter, and here's my batch. Starting point, it's auto sign. Again, that's just a PO lookup. And we'll click on the stun mob. If they sent you, if you got what you asked for, this is how easy this gets, right? You just pick the first choice of each of these little checkbox areas. If there was shipping, this is a time I could put that in here, but I'll also show you another place you can put it. If you got everything you asked for, there's nothing more I need to do here other than hit post. That miscellaneous charge, you could have done it when you came into the form, but if you forgot, maybe at this point, this form is kind of nice because it shows you totals. And you might be, chances are you're working off of an invoice. Chances are you're not standing on the dock with a laptop in your hand, but you have a piece of paper reflecting what happened. And here's this very handy total, so you can see at a glance, does this match that invoice? Now maybe on this one, it's like, this doesn't match. And then you notice, oh, there was shipping. So I come in here and I put, $12 in my shipping. I go back to my lines and I say, oh, okay, that's better. That matches. So when this matches my invoice, everything's probably cool. I like it. I'm gonna go ahead and post. So that's so foolish me. I have one item on here. You guys probably don't do many serialized items. Foolish me. I have a serialized item on here. We're not gonna receive that. Okay. So if you want to see the receiver form, I don't know if you ever actually need this, but this shows you what just happened. Okay. So there's our receiver. It has a date, has a receiver number. The PO number is right down here, and you can see everything that happened. Okay. So maybe someone says, yeah, we want you to print those out, match them up with the invoice, and we have a nice little tie out that shows that what the invoice says matches the receiver. Now, everything I've done so far has been what I would refer to as the full-blown purchasing, meaning we started with a purchase request, we made some choices, it became a PO, eventually it shows up, we receive it. The advantages of this quote-unquote full-blown, your effort or your time is spent up front with the, creating the purchase request, creating the items. You're doing that all up front. So when the time comes to receive, you might have noticed receiving is a walk in the park if you did all the work up front. Okay, so that's kind of the payoff. You do the effort up front, receiving gets streamlined. It is possible though, and again, I have a number of liquor stores. They say, nope, this beginning step, we don't need these. We just need to be able to get our items and our quantities, our costs. We need to get those into Counterpoint quickly. And so they will skip these first two steps, and we do something called receive without PO. And I'll show you what that looks like very briefly, and then we'll have just a couple minutes at the very end here for some questions. So here is very briefly what receive without PO looks like. So as promised, it's a little bit easier. So I go to purchasing, I go straight to receiving, I go to my receivings enter. Here's my batch. And when I click auto assign, it lists all these POs, but I'm not doing anything with POs. So I can simply say cancel. And now I go straight into my receivers. I'm going to pick on a vendor. I can go straight to my lines. You'll notice this looks like a whole lot like that purchase request that we began with. So if that purchase request made sense to you, this form will make sense to you. And we can just put in some items. I can use my lookup. I can type. And not to belabor the point, but you can boom, boom, boom. So for some folks, especially liquor stores, that vendor walked into the store, he figured out you guys kind of jointly agreed on what you want, and he's handing you an invoice, right? Before he walks out the door, he hands you an invoice, and now there's really no point in you doing the full-blown create a purchase request, all that jazz. You can go straight to receiving. So in this example, I'm just going to do 2 items, but you'll notice I just pop those in. Of course, if it's an item you've never carried, no big deal. Click on magnifying glass. You can hit add from here, add that item on the fly. But the goal is to get items, quantities, costs. If everything looks cool, I don't know if there's a delivery charge or not, but you can drop that in. If everything looks cool, nothing more you have to do here. You can go straight to post, and boom, just like that. So receive without PO, you can see, can be very, very streamlined. But again, with receive without PO, you're doing all the effort at the very, very end. You're doing all the effort in the receiver. With the purchase request, you did all the effort up front. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense. That is, believe it or not, this is the big picture I want to be sure that you guys got to today. Again, it truly is considered purchasing basics, but all the concepts we went over today, very, very important, so that when we do our next quarterly training, we'll talk about purchase advice, and we'll use some powers of Counterpoint to generate this purchase request for us. We'll take advantage of the fact that Counterpoint can help us on that topic. So I am conscious of time, so I'm going to go back to my GoToMeeting here, if I can, and I'm going to, if you like, use the chat log here. If you want to submit a question, go ahead, submit a question, and I'll try to hit any questions here now that we're kind of wrapping up. Again, this session was recorded today. We will be sending out a link to that recording. You should all get that. If you don't, reach out to us or to your sales rep and say, hey, I didn't get the link. We'll be glad to make sure that you get this. So it's really cool. We've been doing these quarterly trainings now for a little more than a year and a half. By the time we get through 2 years worth, that'll be 8 trainings. And we'll really have a nice library of really the Counterpoint basics. And by the way, if you're interested in previous trainings, just let us know. We can send you links to those previous trainings as well. All right, well, you guys are being really easy on me, and I don't see any chat questions coming in yet. This is your chance before we wrap up. Any questions on what we've got going here? If this was useful to you at all, send me a smiley face in the chat right now. If it wasn't useful, I don't know what to do then. I'm actually just waiting to see if the chat's working. There's a smiley face. Thank you, Taylor. I guess this is just a quick check to see who's still on the line, right? Maybe people checked out after purchase orders. Okay, well, 100 gold stars for Taylor. Anybody else gonna send a smiley? Oh, thank you, Mary. I see you. All right, so the chat window's working. I'll just hang out here another few minutes if there's any questions. Maybe this was just straightforward enough. You guys are all cool. Thank you, Joan. Okay, I do not see any questions coming in, but thank you for your smiley faces, and thanks. Again, we will be sending out this video, and look for the announcement for the next quarterly training. We'll get into purchase advice, and honestly, that's kind of a big deal. We get people all the time who will say, hey, I spent this money on this investment, our employees are trained, we've been using this for a year or two, but now we're ready for the next level, right? We want to get more out of our investment on Counterpoint. And typically, purchase advice is one of the first things that will cross our minds at LPA when people say that. Because if you think about where Counterpoint sits, it knows your sales, it knows your items, it knows your quantity on hand. So those are, three very valuable pieces of information that could be used so that Counterpoint could give you some advice or recommendations about what to order next. So that's definitely the next topic now that you know the basics. If you haven't done any purchasing or receiving before, I would encourage you to go try it. You don't have to do it for all your vendors, but pick a smaller vendor. Just try out the steps, see if they make sense for you. Of course, if you have any questions or issues, let us know. We'll be happy to share a screen and help. And other than that, thank you for your time. Videos to follow, and I will talk to you in September, if not before then. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.